everyone. Welcome to the Stream of Art podcast, where we chat openly about creativity, personal development, and building a career in the arts. I'm Michelle Monette.
And I'm Robyn Lester.
And this is episode 32. And today we will be talking about self-sabotage, and more specifically, just some of the ways that we get in our own way. But of course, as always, we're going to kick it off with a little bit of a check-in where we each share a win, a fun or interesting thing from the last couple of weeks, and then something we appreciate. Did you want to start us off there, Robyn?
Yeah. My win for this week was I finally... I was working on this piece a while back where I just wanted to create like a really textured background. And so I did that. I just did with white gesso with medium mixed in. So it's really thick, and made this like textured background on canvas. But then I didn't know what to do with it. And it sat on my easel for months. And finally, yesterday, I just kind of had an idea and was able to it's still a work in progress, but it's like the first time I've kind of picked up the paintbrush in any meaningful way. And I think it could be the beginning of a new series potentially.
Ooh.
So that felt good to kind of have that. It wasn't really a breakthrough. It's just sometimes things just take time. And I knew, I'm like, I'll figure it out eventually what to do with this. But yeah, so that was cool. And then something interesting. This isn't really interesting, but just kind of more like funny. Last episode, you had talked about Buffy, which I hadn't thought about Buffy for a while. And I was like, man, now I want to rewatch the show. So I'm rewatching Buffy.
Oh, awesome.
That's my interesting thing.
That is interesting.
Yes. And I was chatting with someone at work and I was telling them, oh yeah, I'm like rewatching Buffy. And they're like, what? They didn't know. I'm like, I thought everyone knew about Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah. Anybody who was around at that time, because it was huge.
It was, right? It wasn't just a little cult classic. It was like a big show.
Yeah. And maybe in the beginning it started off being a little bit more niche, but definitely by the end, before I even got into watching it, I knew what it was, because it's the kind of thing that it's referenced in other pop culture. I think it's been referenced on Friends, and so it's just kind of everywhere. So is this person really old or really young, and maybe they just missed the boat either way, or somebody
Nope.
our age roughly?
Bit older than us.
Okay.
But not that old. Yeah, it threw me and then I was like having to describe the show, and it's like, well, it's about vampires, and then you feel like so lame, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like not Twilight though.
Yeah. I like everybody has, anytime you talk about anything vampire related, you have to go, it's not Twilight. It's just nobody sparkles. The vampires in this are horrifying to look at, but it's because that's the thing. It's, if you just hear the title, so Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it doesn't really do justice to what you get out of the show, because it's so funny and it's so heartwarming and gripping and devastating. Like, there's so much to it. So yeah, it's in this setting where she's slaying vampires and demons and all of that, but there's so much more to it. And it's the kind of thing, if you haven't watched it, it's best to not dismiss it. Give it a chance. It's very campy in a lot of ways. Because of the time.
I do wonder though, because I was saying, I don't know if you came to it in 2024 for the first time. I don't know if it would grab you the same way, right?
Interesting, yeah.
Although, to be fair, like, I watched it for the first time in 2013.
Mm-hmm.
And I was quite engaged. And, like, there's elements of it that are kind of hokey, but it's not off-putting.
Yeah.
But, I just don't know. I'd be curious to talk to someone who watches it for the first time now and to hear, like, could you get into it?
Yeah. Please write in. And if anybody listening to this has not watched Buffy and then chooses to, let us know. I'm definitely curious to know how it holds up.
And then for gratitude this week, I got to give a shout out to, it's, what do you call it? A service? I don't know. They're called Odd Bunch. I think I talked to you about this. And it's this team of people who kind of realize that, like, with grocery stores, there's so much produce that's just wasted because they overbuy or whatever. And so they came up with a business essentially where they work with grocery stores to buy the surplus at a reduced cost And they work with like local farmers and stuff too. If there's produce that is grown that's kind of, they can't bring to market because it's like misshapen or whatever, I don't know if they donate or again, maybe just sell it to this company for a really, really small price. And then this company in turn makes all these variety boxes of fruits and vegetables, and you can buy a subscription box and it comes to your door every week for like, really, I think our box is $20 a week and it's enough for 2 people. It's an incredible service. And just, I think what struck me about that is just like the gratitude I feel for people's creativity. And like they
solve
see
those
that
kinds of problems. Yeah.
Yeah. You see this problem, you see this waste, you see that like people are struggling right now to afford groceries, and you've come up with a way of, I mean, you're putting yourself in the middle, really, but you're funneling waste to the people who would love to have it,
Yeah.
So that's my gratitude. Just people using their brains.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and because you gave me some extra, you had some
overload
of veggies one of the times I was there, and it's all great stuff. Like I was able to use it all, and I was so glad. Yeah, the idea that this is something that could have been thrown away is wild. So my win is that yesterday I finished up this 10-week workout program I was doing, and it's kind of a win that has extra wins within it because
that's not allowed.
I'm
only one win. You can't hide other wins in your win.
I will do what I want. You can't stop me. Who edits this podcast? I do. I can put as many wins as I want. Well,
it just cuts to you talking for 20 minutes.
Just listing win after win after win. And we wonder why nobody listens anymore. Oh my God, stop bragging so much. No, but it's like a little baby win. And that is that I didn't even realize it had come to an end. Like I wasn't keeping track. I was just doing it. And this is Caroline Gervin. She does these great workout, she does strength training and she does HIIT workouts and cardio, and she has a couple of stretching ones as well. So she does just free workouts. She started during the pandemic, and there's a whole bunch of series there. And so that's basically what I do for my workouts is I just do a bunch of hers. And usually what I like to do is pick one of her programs because they last for 10 weeks. It's like 5 days a week for 10 weeks. And the last one I did of hers was really tough. I think I had to take a break halfway through. So, maybe I made it 5 or 6 weeks. I had to take a week where I really reduced the amount of working out I was doing and the intensity just so I could make it through to the end. But this time I didn't. I think it did take me 11 weeks still, just because I had a week. I think it was the week where I'd gone to Montreal to see Bent Knee.
Yeah.
That kind of threw me off a little bit. So I think I'd swapped in some different workouts for the rest of that week and then picked it up the next week just to keep myself lined up with the right number of workouts. But I didn't feel the need to stop. Like I felt definitely tired. I could tell I was doing this, pretty intense program. It's called Epic Endgame. And the premise is that each workout ends with a finisher where you have to do 100 reps of something. So it'll be some kind of an exercise based on whatever the target muscle groups are. And it's really tough. Like some of those took me a long time because I would have to pause the video and do them at my own pace. So just to give you an idea, my last finisher yesterday for this, it was a strength and cardio workout. I had to do 100 chest to floor burpees. So I had to do them in which I love burpees, but 100 of them is a lot. So I had to do them in chunks of 20. So I'd do 20 and then I'd like take a breather and then do 20 more and take a breather. So it did take they were pretty long sometimes when the finisher was pretty tough. But I just kind of noticed this past week, oh no, I'm almost at the end. I'm gonna have to do another one. So yeah, that felt like a pretty big win to finish it and have not been so tired by the end that I was begging for it to be finished, which I don't know if that's just that this is maybe a slightly less intense program than the last one of hers I did. I can't remember what I did last time. or if I just got stronger, or if it's like because I've made some dietary changes too that I think are having a bigger impact than maybe I realized, but who knows? Anyways, I'm just glad.
How long is each session?
These were about 50 minutes.
Ugh.
And then I would tack on a 20-minute cardio after most days, or like an ab workout or something after. So I try to do like an hour a day. I'm going to take the next couple of weeks though to do some lighter stuff to kind of give my body some recovery time. So it'll be like active recovery. So I'm still going to do something, but I think I might take a week where I do walking and yoga, and then I'll do another week where it's back into the workouts, but a little bit lighter. And then I'll pick up another program. Because of course my brain is like, just do another program, but I know better. I know how peak performance happens, and it's not without proper rest. So it is a lot. So I want to give my body a bit of a break. But yeah, anybody out there who likes to do workouts at home and hasn't checked out Caroline Girvan, definitely go check her out. Her stuff is tough, but it's very, very effective. And she has different workouts of different lengths too. So you can get she has some programs where the workouts are like 20 minutes and some are that are 30. Yeah. And so sometimes if I'm going through a really busy period, that's what I'll do instead. It's just, when it comes to exercise, we've talked about this before, it's really just all about the consistency. Like, it's just, as long as you're doing something, you can modify the intensity depending on what else you have going on. So I always love that about the variety that she has there. And I never feel any hesitation to take a week in between a program if I need to do something a little bit lighter. It's all, again, big picture. But anyways, fun/interesting thing is that I read a book that I loved. It was a mystery. I haven't read a mystery, I think, since I was a kid. It's called The Telltale by Claire Ashton. She's somebody I've been reading for a little while now, but she typically writes romance. She writes sapphic romance. But I found this other book of hers because, of course, I have that 3-month, Kindle Unlimited. Right. So I'm trying to get as much use out of it as I can. And that one was up there and hadn't read it yet. So I checked it out. And I wasn't sure because, she does romance so well. I thought, I don't know how she'll do with mystery. She nailed it. It's my second favorite book of hers by far. One of my favorite books of all time. It was just super exciting. So that was a nice surprise. And then that also extends to the thing I appreciate, which is, once again, the Kindle. And I guess by extension, you and Mike for getting me the Kindle, because it is my favorite thing in the world. And I love it. And I would like to just make it known publicly that I want to be buried with it.
Okay, good to know.
Podcasts are legally binding, I'm pretty sure.
I think
this
so.
This can be like brought to a lawyer to be like, yeah, no, bury the Kindle. Nobody else can have it. I want to take it to my grave.
Okay, noted.
Awesome. The topic of the day is self-sabotage is just a short title, but more broadly, what do we do to stand in our own way, to block ourselves? And I was wondering if you wanted to start it off, because this episode was your suggestion. So I thought maybe you had something on your mind.
Yeah. And this is going to be kind of, typical for me, where I'm talking to figure it out. Mm-hmm. I've been reading a book called The Courage to Be Disliked. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
I highly recommend it. I can't remember who the authors are, but we'll put it in the show notes. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty, I think it's a pretty well-known book. Yeah. It's been recommended to me several times by the same person. he keeps talking about it. And he's like, you need to read it. So I finally started reading it. It's really easy to read, but the concepts are very challenging. They challenge. So it's basically, it's sort of explaining through conversation between this like philosopher and the student. It's kind of explaining, I'm going to say this wrong, but Alderian psychology. So like, we have the Freudian psychology, and we have Jung, and then we have this guy named Alder, I guess. I don't know. Again, we'll put it in the show notes. Mm-hmm. And it's really an interesting approach to, what it made me realize is that a lot of our ways of kind of conceptualizing our own psyche, it's very much Freudian. Mm-hmm. And what this guy was proposing kind of runs counter. So like, as an example, he describes personality and disposition. He uses the term lifestyle to describe that. Okay. And he argues that lifestyle is something that we choose and we continue to choose. So essentially what he's saying is that you choose your personality and you choose your disposition. Like that right there runs counter to so much of what we believe in and so much of how we understand ourselves. So that's where it becomes challenging. And so there's certain concepts that come up, like basically you choose to be unhappy, or like you choose to live the way you live, even if you're unhappy with how your life is. All of that is you choosing that for reasons that you're not really conscious of, perhaps, but it all serves a purpose. So I found myself, like, with everything I was reading as I was going through this book, I'm not done yet, I definitely found myself constantly being like, yeah, but, you know, because it really challenges your whole perception. And it challenges your ego too, I think, to an extent as well, because it's like, it almost feels like you're being blamed. And that's not the intention. It's about kind of empowering the person, you know, like, because if you are the one choosing your personality and your disposition and your life, that means the power is all in your hands to make the changes that you want to make, right? So it's ultimately empowering, but it forces you to be really honest with yourself and to be curious without being judgmental. So anyways, so that got me thinking about, it got me thinking about self-sabotage. I don't like that term so much because I think there's so much more behind self-sabotage than we can. Yeah, it's like you were saying before we started, it's not self-sabotage. It's not necessarily conscious. And I think, and what I kind of got from this book is that we sort of, for lack of a better term, I'll continue using self-sabotage as a term, but ultimately when we sort of self-sabotage, it's serving a purpose. So like one of the examples he gave in this book is, and it resonated with me because I'm like, this is kind of the trend that I follow. He used this example of a friend who wants to be a writer, but he doesn't write because he's too tired after work to write. And I'm like, oh, this sounds familiar. And so he's kept living, and that's kind of a self-sabotage right there, right? Like you're letting yourself off the hook. But the purpose that serves is that this guy gets to live in the realm of possibility. And now the story he can tell himself is, man, like if only I had the energy after work, like I could get books published, and all of that is in this area, like this realm of possibility, which is safe because it means your dream can stay alive. Whereas if you were to be like, well, you know what? No, okay, I feel too tired to write, but I'm going to write anyways. And I'm going to try, I'm going to try. And then you fast forward 15 years and realize you haven't accomplished what you thought you'd accomplished. It's scary. Like that, the fear with that unknown there, right? So it's like you have this choice between doing the thing and failing potentially, or not doing the thing, make an excuse for why you don't do the thing, and it continues to be a dream that you can cling on to, right? So yeah, I don't know. Anyways, I'm going to pause here in case you have thoughts.
Yeah, I do. I'm just taking a couple of notes.
Yeah, I think what my takeaway was like, we need to look at where we keep like those repeating patterns, and everyone has it, right? We keep getting stuck on the same thing, or we keep reverting back to the same, like for me, you know, I'll go through phases where I'm eating well and exercising, and then I revert back. And so it's looking at those areas of your life and getting real with yourself and thinking, okay, what is the benefit of staying stuck? Like, what am I trying to accomplish by staying stuck? Essentially, what am I trying to accomplish here by self-sabotaging?
It's gonna bother me so much because it's right on the tip of my brain, but there is a book I read recently, and that was a premise that was discussed. This idea of what are you gaining? What's it might be called like a secondary benefit. There's some kind of benefit you gain from keeping yourself where you are. And being able to figure out what that is can help get you unstuck. I hope I remember what it is. I'm gonna have to flip through some books later and see if I can figure it out. And if I have figured it out, it'll be in the show notes. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in reading this book because I love having that experience with a book. You're like, okay, yeah, but, Because I'm like, oh, that's where I'm gonna be challenged and pushed quite a bit.
You have to keep an open mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I, like, because I immediately, like 5 pages in, I was already like, felt this kind of resistance to the ideas. And I was okay, well, I got to keep an open mind, and you got to remind yourself that nothing is all true, right? Like, you take what makes sense to you.
Absolutely.
Like, there's some things that he's talking about, and I just can't wrap my head around, because there's factors in life that are beyond our control, and things are like not having access to food, and so we're hungry and unhappy because we can't eat. And you're saying we're choosing that response. You know what I mean? Like, there's
of course.
It feels like there's exceptions, and that's where my brain goes when I'm reading this stuff. Like, what I just talked about was only like 20 pages of the book, and there's all sorts of other stuff and everything hits so hard and makes you think so much.
I love that. Yeah, I want to read that for sure. I think there is this challenge, and I'm sure we've talked about this before, the challenge of being able to hold two seemingly opposed ideas in your head at the same time, or recognize that there are truths to both. So definitely being able to recognize the degree of responsibility we have over our own lives and experiences, and then also recognizing systemic issues like people living in food deserts or discrimination or all sorts of things. So being able to recognize that both of those things are true, and then definitely making it work for yourself. At the end of the day, for as much as we do want to be working towards improving the world and creating better systems that serve more people, we are responsible for ourselves, and it has to start there. So starting from yourself is the easiest thing you can do to create some kind of change, at the very least for yourself. But it's the idea that there's no such thing as one-way liberation. If you free yourself, you can't help but then put yourself in a position to free other people, even if it's just by the clarity of your example. But inevitably, I think when somebody has that experience of being able to take that control and that responsibility, they want to help empower people to do the same.
Yeah, there's a point that he made in this book that I thought was really interesting, and I'm still kind of unpacking, where, and again, I think culturally we have a tendency to define ourselves by the trauma we experience. Like, we let trauma define us.
Yeah.
And he's sort of arguing that, like, whatever has happened in the past, it has no real bearing on your life right now and how you move forward. We let it have bearing because we've been told this narrative that trauma defines you. But ultimately, that's not the case. Ultimately, it doesn't actually matter what's happened to you. We've made a series of choices. Like, that's all it is.
Yeah.
And right there, right? It's such a challenging thought. But then you start to think, and I'm thinking, there are people who have experienced horrific traumas and have gone on to live really enriching and fulfilling lives despite the trauma they experienced. It doesn't mean they're not without their scars, but they didn't let that keep them down. They didn't let that define them. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot there that's just like,
yeah. Yeah. And again, it's, how do you acknowledge the trauma from your past, whether that's, a person's individual trauma or like our collective trauma? So like the recovery we're going to need to go through over the next however many years because of COVID, that's a whole collective trauma that we're going to have to work through. Like, it's done damage, to us collectively. There is that recovery period that needs to happen. And I've experienced this myself. Actually, this is a very timely conversation because I went through a period of a lot of going back and doing work on stuff I dealt with, from the time I was a kid. All these things that I guess could be considered, lowercase trauma, lowercase t trauma, but that were really impacting me and that I had to move through. And so there was a period of sitting and really, and I think, the idea of letting myself be defined by it for a while so that I could come to a degree of acceptance for what happened, for some of the choices I made because of where I was in my life at the time. And then I was able to eventually get to a place where I realized that wasn't serving me anymore. And it's like this switch flipped. and I was ready to let the past be the past and start taking that ownership. It's what Marcus Aurelius says, you know, we have to become active in our own rescue. And that's where I'm at right now, is that I did all of that work to get myself to a place where now I'm thinking, okay, I can make different choices now. I know better now. And trying to embody the idea of personal responsibility, you know, as much as I can. But yeah, there's a couple of things you said that really stuck out. The idea of letting yourself off the hook, I think I see that so much. And I know I've been guilty of that too. You know, being able to give yourself an excuse, a justification for not doing something, even though it's important. And this is something, I feel like Seth Godin talks about this. It might have been in his book, The Practice. He talks about, you know, when you put yourself on the hook and what that means. And the idea too of the realm of possibility, that I know I've spent a lot of years there. You know, you're not actually taking the steps to do the thing for one reason or another, but you can always exist with that idea in your head of like, this is what it could be. This is, you know, and it's kind of a dangerous place to be if you don't eventually actually take steps to close the gap between where you are and what you're seeing in your head, because otherwise it's just always getting kicked down the road. And this is something Stephen Pressfield talked about in, I'm pretty sure, in The War of Art, where he said, you know, it's never that somebody's saying, I'm never going to write my great novel or the opera or whatever. It's always, I'm going to start it tomorrow. I'm going to start it tomorrow. So it's always just pushing it down for reasons like being tired, being overwhelmed and all of that. And, you know, maybe that's something worth digging into a bit more. If you're tired in the moment, what can you do to get through that? But if you're tired all the time, that is maybe a symptom of a bigger problem. And that's something you can address. But if you're constantly just writing it off as, I'm too tired, I'm not going to do it, or I'm going to do it tomorrow, whatever, you know, you're forever, like you said, like you're going to find yourself 15 years down the line and nothing has changed. And that's a really unpleasant place to be.
I think, but I think what's interesting is it's, you know, like the reason I give myself is I'm too tired, but that's not the real reason I'm putting it off. And the real reason I'm putting it off is because of a fear of what if I try this dream and it doesn't work out. And so I think that's where we need to dig deeper. So I think we kind of stay at the surface level too much, right? And it's like, because I have an awareness. I have awareness that like I make excuses for all sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
Usually around being, oh, I'm too tired. I don't have the energy after work or whatever. And, you know, so you have an awareness of that, and then you judge yourself because it's like, oh, I can't even like, you know, I'm letting myself off the hook too easy. But there's a deeper fear there that has really deep roots. And it's not surprising that I would keep finding reasons not to do the thing when you look at. So I think it's just like digging. You got to dig deeper. You find that surface level reason why you're not doing the thing, but that's not the reason. That's not the core reason. Dig deeper and then you'll get there. And then once you have that awareness, you can work on that, right?
Yeah.
So it's because I could work on like, yeah, okay, I'm too tired. I can work on that, but I'll find another reason. And you'll keep finding other reasons to not do the thing.
Yeah, you're like, well, it's some kind of an insert obscure holiday here. I can't do it on this most sacred of days. I'll do it tomorrow. Yeah, that's actually, I'll come back to that point because I had written down a couple of ideas for things people can do if they find they're continuing to give themselves the same excuses. But I also thought it'd be interesting to maybe go through, which we've already talked about, but maybe some of the things we tell ourselves that keep us stuck, keep us from doing the thing that we want to be doing. And one of them here was, actually there's two sides to this. So one is telling ourselves that we're not good enough to do something.
Yeah.
I also put here sometimes telling ourselves that we're too good to do something. And this is something I see with musicians sometimes, the idea that, oh, I'm not going to go and work on my fundamentals because like I'm too advanced for that. And that's not holding yourself back in the way that it's not that you're not doing the thing, they might still be working on some things, but if little Billy is trying to shred some Yngwie Malmsteen before he's really, mastered the basics, he's going to run into some trouble at some point. And either he's going to have to have a little humble pie and get to work on the fundamentals, because every musician needs to do that, or he's going to get frustrated and give up. So there are things like that. That's a little bit different, but I thought, oh, that's actually somewhere where I see people getting in their own way, musically speaking. I'm sure that's true in so many disciplines. The idea of being, I'm too good for this, or I'm too good to do the work. I'm a genius. I should just be accepted. Things like that are also a way people get in the way, but I think it stems from the same place. It's fear. It's fear of inadequacy, because if you have to admit that there's work still to be done, it means you're not perfect or whatever. You're not as advanced as you think, or or there could be, fear of judgment, or of course.
You're concerned with how it appears to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Another one I had here was perfectionism, or having an all or nothing mentality. That one tripped me up for years. Telling ourselves that we're not ready or we don't feel ready. This is one that I think there is something to be said for being able to acknowledge when you need more. So maybe you want to do something and you realize, oh, there is actually this training that I need before I can do that thing. And then you go get the training. That's different than just saying, I'm not ready, or I don't feel ready, and then not doing anything to get yourself ready. So that can be self-sabotage, or it can be a form of holding yourself back if you're letting the fear of not being ready. And I guess that ties into not feeling good enough, but I'm not ready to do that. Can be something that gets in the way as well. And then we've already talked about procrastinating, kicking that can down the road. Although, again, procrastination can be productive. That's a whole other conversation. Maybe that's something we can go into for its own episode, because I think procrastination is a really interesting topic. And my thinking around it has evolved a lot. But those were just a few that I had thought of. But yeah, and I really like what you said about, having awareness, but having like a deep awareness, not having that surface level awareness, because something else is definitely going to crop up. It's like, again, treating the cause rather than just the symptom.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it, I think. And because there's just some things that are an issue. The issue runs on repeat for years. Like our lives just are about, for me, it's, I think, challenges with work or whatever. Like that's been a consistent for my entire working life.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's something there that, like there's something there that's deeper than what I've perceived. Like it's it's that kind of, you hear this saying, if you're the common denominator of all your problems, like there's something with you.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what I'm recognizing, I guess, is I think some people have, myself included, like we see these patterns and we kind of, that's just the way life is for us. Like we give all our agency, we just like give it to like the cosmos, like here. And in taking back that agency and acknowledging that there's something that I am doing in my life that is creating these challenges. I mean, it's a really, really hard thing to admit to, but it's very liberating once you do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's always worth it to better understand yourself, even if that's really uncomfortable, especially if that's really uncomfortable. And I think so often that does link back to us having to recognize where we are being our own worst enemy, and maybe, beginning and then continuing patterns, but also maybe continuing patterns from our past. So maybe we're not the ones who set us off on the course we're on, specifically. There could be all sorts of things from our past that have, objectively been what lead us, to where we are. But there's that acknowledgement that at some point you're just kind of keeping it going. It's sort of like, this is not a real example, but if somebody gets a hamster wheel spinning and then they put you in it, and they're like, okay, you got to keep running on that wheel. It keeps spinning if you keep running on it. If you get off, it'll stop. But because of the momentum and because somebody else started it for you, it might feel like oh, I can't, well, this is my life. I've always been running on this wheel. I can't just get off. I can't just do something different. But actually the power is in you to do that. And that is absolutely liberating and empowering once you realize that. So there is that, the difficulty of that acceptance period. But then there's this freedom that comes with that. That comes from knowing it doesn't have to be the same. I can make different choices. And yeah, those choices are going to be hard and it's going to be uncomfortable. And in a lot of cases, if you're making substantial changes, life as you know it is going to be completely flipped upside down. It's the idea that, in order to have the life you want, it's going to cost you the life you have.
Yeah. And I think in this book, he touches on that. And that's why we choose not to change.
Yeah.
Because there's a benefit to not changing.
Yeah.
And the benefit is that we know, we may not be living a super happy life, but at least we know what the life we're living, right? It's familiar. It's in some ways feels easier than changing everything. So I think what I find kind of refreshing about the whole perspective that this book is sort of offering is that, we make the choices we make. They're not always in line with what we actually want, but there's a reason all of the choices we do make serve some sort of purpose. And there's something that, I don't know, because then it's like a puzzle to work out. It's like, okay, well, what are some choices that I've made that I'm not super happy with? Okay, and why did I, what purpose what benefit was I getting from making that choice? And once you start looking at that, it becomes really, really fascinating.
Yeah, there's a word you had used earlier, which I love, which is curiosity. When you can have that curiosity about yourself, it's just such a different place to operate from. And yeah, thinking about it like a puzzle, because puzzles are fun. I love a good puzzle. And if I can be my own puzzle, how exciting is that? And if at the end of it, you're able to recognize some patterns you didn't see before and then compile some tools that'll help. Oh, and that's something I made a list of as well, or just some possible things you can do. So in cultivating that deep awareness, some of the things that'll help will be, some quiet self-reflection. This is where solitude is really important and where we are really done dirty by all of the distractions we have available to us, because we are able to block out all of that thinking we really need to do about ourselves, that self-reflection. We're able to block it out with any number, pick your poison, whatever your distraction is. So having that self-reflection time is really critical. Journaling is a great way to facilitate that as well. I have found it so helpful to keep a journal over the last now 2.5 years, being able to go back and read my entries and make notes and go, oh, I'm seeing this as a pattern. This is a pattern. This is what happens when this happens. And I can see how I do this and then make changes. Therapy too. Or even just having a conversation with somebody if you don't have access to a therapist, being able to have a conversation like this where you go, oh, I do this thing or whatever, like where I have my meetings with my Stoic friends, that can really help me better understand myself because of hearing other people's stories, all of that sort of thing. There's another benefit to stories, to link it back to our 2 episodes on stories. Being able to see yourself reflected sometimes reveals to you something about yourself you didn't know, or you knew on some level, but you didn't have the words to articulate it. And now all of a sudden somebody's sharing their story and maybe they're giving you language to describe something that you've been doing without realizing it. And that's really powerful.
Disadvantage to story is the stories we tell ourselves.
Yes, of course. For anybody who hasn't listened to that episode, go check that was episode 30 was stories. And we did talk about that being a downside, when we tell ourselves stories that don't serve us and that do keep us stuck. So, and then from there, of course, self-awareness is great, but you need more than that to get, if you want to make a change. Maybe you realize that you have these patterns and you're okay just keeping them where they are. You're like, you know what? I'm okay with things the way they are. You're a Ron Swanson type and you like things to not change. That's fine. But if you want to make some changes, then there are some things you can turn to build up a toolkit. So things like working on your mindset, which, there are any number of resources that'll help you do that. Books, podcasts, therapy again. If you did something like CBT and ACT and DBT, like all those like modalities, those can be helpful. having somebody hold you accountable. So having that external accountability. So if you want to work on your novel every night after work, get an accountability buddy. Get somebody to body double you. So you get somebody to work on something at the same time. So maybe you have a partner or a roommate or a friend or whatever. You can do stuff over Zoom where you ask, can you show up and just sit with me for an hour and a half, whatever, while I work on this? And, they can work on their own thing or play, Switch or whatever, do something, read a book, just to have somebody there to keep you on task so that you can't talk yourself out of it. Because we're so good at giving ourselves an out, at letting ourselves off the hook. So having somebody who will keep you to that can also help to break some of those patterns. And then I think from there, it probably gets a lot easier because once you can establish a habit, it's so much easier to keep it going. And then you build the momentum and then you're on to the next pattern. So it's just like that, I think, until you die, just going from one pattern, breaking it, making better choices, and then doing it again.
I think something that kind of struck me is I have a complicated relationship with habits. And there's that whole, you got to stick with something for 30 days and then it becomes a habit. That is not what my experience with habits has been. I've had habits that I've stuck with for 3 months and then they go out the window. So I think sometimes the approach to habit building is presented a little too simplistically. But I wonder if part of that is because we're trying to habit our way out of a situation that we haven't fully understood.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking.
And I think, if you want to paint more, but there is a deep-rooted fear there or something, right? You can build all the habits that you want, and you're gonna fall off the wagon. And it's going to be even harder for you to get back on the wagon because now not only are you dealing with this deep-rooted kind of unconscious fear about painting, you're also dealing with this sense of failure from the last time you tried to build this habit and failed. Mm-hmm. And so you have two things working against you there, right? I think before building habits, we need to really look at what is it that we're trying to change and why is it that we've been so resistant to that change up until now? And I don't know if you can successfully build habits unless you do that work first.
I agree with you 100%. Yeah, because it is like trying to build a house when you haven't built the foundation first. It's like trying to put up walls and a roof, but there's no foundation. Yeah, I think that's definitely the realization I've come to as well. Or I think from my perspective, I did a great job of sticking with habits for a lot of years, but in a really unhealthy way. So that could be the flip side of that, where either you struggle to stick with habits because you don't have that deep understanding, that deep awareness, and you haven't built that internal foundation first. And so you try to develop a habit and then it falls away because there's nothing there to support it. And then you feel bad. And then it's compounded because you have all these other things, it's the disappointment and the failure and all of that. Or you do like what I did, where it's a habit, but you don't really know why, or you're not doing it in a way that actually supports what you really want because you haven't taken the time to really figure out what you want, who you are, how is this potentially self-destructive. So I think, again, it's going to come back to that self-reflection and making that an active practice in whatever way makes the most sense, to be able to look at the things you're doing and something like with habit building, to maybe have somewhere where you write down the habit you're trying to build, write down maybe how you're trying to approach building it. And then if you do fall off, rather than thinking, oh, I failed, you go, oh, I have new information. Treating it like an experiment. Again, that curiosity, that open-mindedness, just going, I wonder how I can build this habit. Not trying it one way, and then when you aren't successful, thinking, oh, well, I'm a failure. Of course I couldn't do it. And that's not going to serve you. It's having the right mindset and then the right set of tools to help you figure out what works for you and where there might be a missing piece. Because, again, to look at my life from the outside now compared to 7-8 years ago, not a lot has changed to the casual observer. I still do a lot of the same things, but it feels totally different to me now that I have that deep understanding of myself. And I will give credit to James Clear, who does talk about identity in his book, Atomic Habits. So he talks about how that is the place to be coming from for habits. So the idea of being a musician and practicing because you are a musician. So it's the, that internal place that you're coming from. So a habit is something really that just supports the person you want to be or the thing you want to do or however you want to think about it.
As long as you actually want to be that thing. And
yes,
this is the other, this is where we can run into issues too, because we see other people living lives that we think maybe we want to live. We don't actually, but we feel like we should want that life because it looks good or it's, and so then we start building, and I think this is another reason why habits can fail, because we start building a life or building habits that work towards a life that we don't actually really want, but we thought we wanted because it's what we see around us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree with you 100%. And that's, again, where that self-reflection is so critical. Like asking yourself, do I want this? What, and then, if the answer is no, what do I want? And that's where getting inside yourself is really helpful. And this is a process, you figure out over time what you don't like. And so again, running it like an experiment, I think is key. So for somebody maybe trying to build a habit and they think, going running every day seems like a great habit. And so I'm going to build that. If they find out they hate running and then they drop it, rather than saying, well, again, I'm a failure, I can't do this thing. If you go, okay, running is not a good fit. But what am I really trying to do here? What is the habit supporting? If I want to be a healthy and active person, there's a lot of ways to accomplish that. So it's like going broader and then going narrower and trying to find your thing. So maybe the person who hates running actually loves biking. And so that's what they do instead. Or they love to go swimming and they find a local pool and they can go swimming in the morning or go do yoga every morning or in the afternoon. Like for me, I've talked about this before. I don't work out in the mornings. I work out in the afternoons because that works way better for me. I tried working out in the morning for a long time because that's, part of it is just that's the only time I had available. I'm very lucky that I can work out in the afternoons now. But, I realized that, even though so many people have that as part of their morning habit, they're getting up at 4 or 5 or 3 in some crazy cases and then working out like crazy. Like that just doesn't work for me. But what am I really trying to do? I want to be an active, strong, and healthy person. So how do I do that in a way that works for me? So yeah, bigger picture, and then finding the ways to support that and being mindful, being intentional, not just throwing habits around just for the sake of it. Although I think there's something to be said for, somebody building a habit and being able to sustain it, and for that to help make them feel more capable. And that could be something. And then from there, if they realize, I don't really dig this habit, you can swap it out. But you still have that confidence in knowing, you can do it. And if you can do it with something you don't like, imagine how much easier it's going to be with something you do like.
Yeah.
In the end, everything just needs more nuance, I think. Not always. Sometimes things need to be simpler. But I think with habits, there's definitely, they aren't the be-all, end-all. There's more to it.
Yes. And this is my challenge with any of the kind of like self-help productivity type books, or it always paints a very black and white picture, and I just don't think that's realistic.
Yeah, I think that's changing, because certainly the books that I've read on productivity and self-development, they feel very robust and nuanced and very rooted in being human and all of that. So I think that's changing. I feel like that's a lot more old school, but things are changing, especially if you read a lot of different kinds of these books. They talk to each other, and then you can take ideas and different perspectives from each and then mold them to your own. So I think that's the thing, is don't take any one book as gospel. Sort of like what you're doing, you do feel like a pushing against having an open mind, but you don't have to adopt everything this person says and then treat that as like, this is the thing. It can converse with your life and then with other books that you read, or again, podcasts or whatever. But yeah, actually, I would love for us to do an episode on productivity. I know we had talked about doing like an episode talking specifically about Cal Newport's book, Productivity, but I think I'd actually rather just talk about productivity, and then I'll bring that up inevitably because I think he has such an incredible approach to it. And again, a bigger picture approach. It's not so much productivity strategies, although he talks about that, of course, as well, but not so much within this book. It's a little bit more bigger picture, although he does have practical strategies to implement it. But I feel like that would be a good conversation because I know there's a lot of pushback on productivity, but there's also a lot of pushing of productivity. And so I think it'd be interesting for us to go deeper on that, especially because I think your experience with it is a little bit different than mine.
Yeah, and I'm going through like right now, I'm just kind of tired of all of that stuff. Like optimizing. I don't know if I talked about this already.
Yeah,
I might have already. Yeah. I'm just kind of burnt on all of that self-improvement stuff, and just kind of wanting to live more for the moment and live more in the moment. And to me, all of that kind of runs counter to living in the moment, you know?
Yeah. I think I'm just
in a different kind of frame of mind.
Which is why I think it would be so interesting for us to talk about it. Because I'm very much like productivity, rah, rah, rah. But it's because I'm coming from a different perspective. I think I always have. I think that's one area where I was at such a huge advantage because I knew so early that I wanted to do music. And so it was always productivity in support of the thing I loved more than anything in the world. And so it never felt like it was being forced on me. And while I certainly, like anybody, I felt the pressure of culture, you know, of hustle culture and all of that. At the end of the day, it's an internal thing. And I realized that if I'm feeling pressured to be productive all the time, that's on me. I'm making that choice to let myself be swayed by cultural expectations, and I don't have to. So I think that's one place I've actually gotten pretty good at is like not spitting in the face of culture per se. I'm not that aggressive about it, but it just making my own choices. I know at this point how to make something work for me and what I'm trying to accomplish. So yeah, I think that would be a good one. Anyways, we don't want to dig into productivity at this point. You'll have to wait for the episode when we talk about productivity. But do you have any last thoughts you can think of on either on the book or on the topic of self-sabotage / getting in your own way? Or do you have any examples from your life right now beyond what you've shared?
No, those are kind of, and this is still very much I'm still unpacking a lot of this as I read it. So I haven't quite figured out the links to my own life yet.
Yeah.
I highly encourage everyone to read this book. And
I'm going to read it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you know, open mind and go into it prepared to feel almost threatened. You know, like that kind of was how I felt. And yeah, there's still some concepts that I have a really hard time wrapping my head around, like the idea that we're not defined by our trauma. Like that is still one that is very challenging to sort of get around. And I don't know if I'll ever fully believe that, right? Like there's so much, the human psyche is so complex, but what I do like is that it did make me aware that we have the way that we understand our psyche is predominantly kind of like Freudian or Jung. And there's other ways to perceive this, right? So I think being introduced to this kind of other way that seems fringe is important.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think, and then just the takeaway, and this is something I've reflected a lot about over the past year, I think, is just being really easy on ourselves and not beating ourselves up about how we are.
Yeah, it's that marriage of self-discipline and self-compassion. So having the discipline to do the work of figuring out your patterns, but then having that compassion to give yourself space, time to heal if that's what you need. Because as much as I understand the idea of us not being defined by our trauma or being able to choose to not be defined by it, we are shaped by it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's inevitable that we are who we are because of our experiences. Like that's...
Yeah, and see, like he would argue that we choose who we are. And that's where it's really hard to wrap your head around this idea that we choose who we are.
Yeah, see, I'm wanting to say, yeah, but. So, yeah. Yeah, I got to read this book. This might be a fun one to revisit. once I can get my hands on it.
It's a book I have to reread because I had all these sorts of realizations as I was reading it, but I don't make notes as I read. And so then I need to go through it again and make notes, I think, because it's just, and I think it is a book that you have to read twice. Like you read it through once quickly and you get like, you'll feel yourself get frustrated.
Yeah.
And then you let, the ideas, the concepts will kind of absorb slowly. And then you reread and take notes and whatever. Yeah. There's all sorts of, like they get into what the other concept that's really interesting is like all problems are interpersonal problems. That's another one that's really interesting. Yeah. It just, it's a good one.
Yeah. I do love those kinds of books. Really take a big swing. And yeah, I think it's always helpful to remember that you can take away from something what works for you. And to read, again, reading widely is so helpful because you can get so many different perspectives and see how they all kind of bump into each other or work together or whatever. So yeah, I'm definitely intrigued. So maybe we'll have some kind of a
Part two.
Yeah, that'd be really fun. So do you have anything exciting going on for the next 2 to 3 weeks? I think we have a bit of a bigger gap this time.
Nothing excited. I'll keep working on this painting that I started and see where that goes. And then otherwise, life.
Yeah, life and trying not to be, and choosing your personality. So I'm curious to see what personality you have next time. I'm
going to choose. I'll choose my own personality. It'll be a new one every month.
I feel like doesn't that mean you'd fit the criteria of having some kind of a disorder? I feel like if your personality changes that much.
Potentially.
Anyways, that's out of my jurisdiction, out of my realm of expertise. Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat, just working. I'm working on a lot of things right now. Something I'm trying to do is talk less about what I'm working on and just work on it. Rather than being like, I'm working on this and this and this. I'm working on stuff is all I'm going to say.
Yeah, good for you.
I will say I am, because I did talk about this in the last episode. I am working on that bonus episode. So I said I was going to have that out before this one, but actually I've decided I'm going to do video for it too. So it's going to take a little bit longer, but I have been working on that and I'm having a lot of fun with it. So I'm really excited to get that out. So that'll be out at some point this month for sure. Like that's my sort of main project at this point because I'm super psyched. But yeah, I'm gonna have that done. But yeah, otherwise less chatter and more work, and then you'll see stuff once it comes out.
I remember my script writing professor saying that. She was saying like, whatever you do, don't talk about the script you're gonna write, because that way if you talk about it, you're getting the story out there, so you're not gonna have the same drive to actually write it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm noticing that because I felt like I've heard that advice before, and I thought, maybe I talk a lot about things, but I do get things done. It just, maybe takes me a long time, but definitely having something I'm working on right now that I have not told anybody, and it's big, but I'm working on it. That's exciting. It does make me want to work on it more.
Yeah.
So I think there's something to that for sure. And other than that, just lots of reading, lots more reading. I probably am going to listen to that book like now. I just finished the whatever I was listening to last. Oh, I listened to Perennial Seller by Ryan Holiday, which was really great for anybody who does creative work and wants to put it out into the world and, either as a side thing or to make a living. That was a really informative book. And what else do I have? Nothing. That's it. Reading and work.
Sweet.
Yeah. So thank you everybody for listening. You can send questions or comments to us at streamofartpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram. We are at streamofartpodcast. You can follow us each individually on Instagram. You can never remember both of our handles, so you just find the links in the description or in the show notes. You can join our Discord. If you are a guitarist or a singer or a songwriter and you're interested in maybe taking some lessons with me and want to sign up for a free consultation/session, you can fill out an application on my website. There'll be a link below, of course. If you are a musician who wants coaching with me, again, same deal, fill out an application and we can hop on a call and see if we're a good fit. And I promise I'm not going to advertise my lessons in coaching every single episode, but I've just relaunched, so I'm going to indulge myself in a couple, and then, from there, people will just be able to figure it out. Woo. So we will see you all in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.